Díomh agus fáilte chuig What the Focal. Hi and welcome to What the Focal. I'm Ciara Ní É and here with me today is Eoin McEvoy, Mc chomhbhádóir le AerachAiteach Gaelach agus leor tograí eile. And today we're going to talk about the community of people who speak Irish and also identify as LGBTQ+. Fáilte isteach Eoin.
Gur míle maith here, tá sé go asfense.
Tá sé go háling a bheith caint leat, go hondúil. Being with le céile sa bhíortha like agrú imeachtaí. So quite often we're together in real life organizing events, but it's all been virtual this year so far and all of last year.
But we've managed to get a lot done nonetheless. Like AerachAiteachGaelach is only, in existence since the start of 2020, like 2020. We actually got a lot done, really.
Yeah, and okay, so I'm going to assume that people watching this know nothing about anything, and there actually might even be people who are watching it saying, whoa, I never thought about that. Of course, there is that intersectionality, and of course, there do exist Irish speakers who happen to be LGBT, and they are at that crossroads. So we're just going to assume that people don't know anything about that. So I want to start off. I did mention that we founded AerachAiteachGaelach together, and I want to get to that later. But first, I thought maybe you could talk about the Queercal Comhrá and what happens at the Queercal Comhrá.
I'd love to, because it's a fantastic group. It's a group that was set up in 2018 to bring queer people who speak Irish together. And it was quite small at the start. It was a man called Dan O'Donoghue who set it up, who is now working very closely with tourists in the north, with Linda Irvine, and actually like showing the Protestant community there that Irish belongs to them as well, which is really exciting too on another level. But he set the group up in 2018, and the group used to meet in pubs or in cafes, and now it's obviously online along with the rest of our lives. And we meet twice a week on Zoom, and it's incredible how long we're able to stay on Zoom. Zoom is hard at the best of times, but we meet at 8 and we're still there sometimes at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. And there's people who join us from all over the world, people of all genders. And it's really exciting. I don't know what else to say about it. It's hard to describe to people, because really it is just a group of strangers who met together because they had these two things in common. They were queer and they spoke Irish, but actually we've become a really close-knit, like almost family of sorts. And it's been a really important support group for all of us actually through lockdown, just to keep us laughing, is the main thing. Like we laugh from one end of the evening to the other while we even talk about like serious things. So it's a very, very valuable social group for queer Irish speakers.
I would definitely say laughing is just the main, like, it's funny because this morning I was just thinking about Zooms and I was like, I think I'm going to stop Zooming. I think I'm just going to tell everyone I'm on a Zoom break for my mental health. And then I was just like, but what about the Queercal? And like, I don't even go every time it's on, but whenever I do go, I just get such a rush of energy. And there's it's very permissive space. And like, I find like there's so little in my life now where I get to be cheeky and bold and this energy, but really, really once I log into the Queercal Comhrá, there's all these people coming at me and I'm like, trying to respond to all these little comments. It's amazing. So yeah, Mugra iad ar fad. I think like the thing about the Queercal Comhrá that we should mention, of course it's on Zoom now, but it's funny how this snowball effect kind of happened. Like I remember being at a festival in Rathcarn at Foclóir Aiteach, and there was this man talking to me, and I was kind of like, okay, this man talking to me, like whatever. And then once I understood that he was gay, I was just like, oh, I have to get you to go to the Queercal. And then I gave him your number. And next of all, I hear that you're like best friends, and he always comes to the Queercal, and you go on all these mad nights out together. So it's just amazing how like there is that instant connection, because not only do you speak this minoritized language, but you belong to a minoritized group of, queer people. And it's just instant like, oh, I found my people. Great.
And it's also like, maybe for people who haven't heard about it, it's a larger group than you might expect. Like it keeps surprising the two of us how many people there are who fall into both categories, because you'd think because they're both smaller minority or minoritized groups that wouldn't be the case. But we keep on finding new people who are lesbian or gay or bi or trans, and it's just really exciting to be part of it at this stage as well, while it's kind of building speed. Because there was a group in the 90s called the GAA, Gael Aeracha Aontaithe, so the United Gay Irish Speakers, Gaeilgeoirí Aeracha Aontaithe. And it's, you know, we've spoken about this before, it's very hard to find out any information about them, even though they were set up in 1993. So like, it's exciting to be part of this now at this sort of early stage of the Queercal Comhrá, but I think it's important as well to remember that we're not the first group that's ever done this, and that it has existed before, and to try and make those connections back to what's been there before and to those communities that, I mean, people from that are still around, but sometimes we lose the connection. So trying to keep that all together as well, and to try and grow the community, you know, in both directions, to the older generation and to the younger generation, and to keep those conversations going between the different groups, because it's very enriching.
I know, it's mad when I remember when you first showed, and I think we should talk a bit about how things have grown in the queer community, that we've started having Pride events and everything. But one of the years when at the Pride event, you said, I just want to show everyone this video. And it was Roy Galvin, is that his name?
That's his name, yeah.
Yeah, talking with MTS, Martin Tomhionin, about the GAA, the Gaeilgeoirí at AerachAiteach. And it was just such a little time capsule of just the way he was speaking about being gay, the questions he got, and kind of the way it was treated. The fact that it was only, you know, 20 years previous, was it? Yeah, 20 years, 30? I can't do math. What year did you?
1993. It was set up just after decriminalization, as far as I know. Maybe 1996. It was somewhere around that time. I think that was kind of turning point, like 2015 with the same-sex referendum, and even 2018, the other referendum, that they were turning points. But I think 1993 allowed lots of those kind of things to happen for people when like homosexual acts were decriminalized. So I think that's when it comes from. But that is a beautiful little clip, and you know, maybe we could share the link, because but what's interesting about it too is that, you know, MTS, Martin Tomhionin, from the Gaeltacht in Connemara, is, you know, I think it's something that's maybe a little bit new for him. You know, you can feel that he's maybe a little bit unsure about how to ask the questions, but he's very open as well, and he listens, and he responds in a very tolerant and like interested way as well, not just sort of tolerant, but, and I think that's something that people don't really think about when they think about the Irish language community, that it is tolerant space for all types of people, and it really is. You know, it's such a diverse community, even though it's small. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I didn't mean to say that Martin Tom was, but it was interesting that it was something kind of to be remarked upon, that he was, that kind of way. It was like, and I think it was what he was saying. And it is funny. Yeah, it is like, funny.
And Roy was a dancer. And I think it's like Martin says, like, but you wouldn't be interested in the other women dancers or something.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's really good.
I'll link that below, and I'll link like basically everything we're talking about, because I do intend this video to be a good touch point for anyone who wants to learn more about the queer Gaeilgeoirí community now and previously, because you made a really good point, Eoin, that like we don't think we're like inventing something new, and like it's not a cool hip thing to be a queer Gaeilgeoirí. Like this is something that has always happened, because gay people have always existed. And I recommend anyone to watch Sam O'Farrig's poem Mc Evoy, which that won first place in the won second place in the Lúnasa slam poetry competition, and it's just a gorgeous poem about kind of the history of queer people in Ireland and how ancient it is.
Yeah, I think the issue is that none of it was or very little of it was written down, and when it's not written down, people think it wasn't there. But obviously that's not the case, and he in that poem, he describes that very well. Like, there have been gay people on this island since before the Irish language came to the island, which is a very important point. Just because nobody wrote about it, or people were too afraid sometimes to talk about it, doesn't mean that people weren't there, and that there haven't, you know, it's not Ahmadinejad's Iran. Like, there are gay people here, and there were always gay people here, queer people here. So it's really important, and we do sort of recognize that in everything we're doing as well, and try to make that point quite clearly to the rest of the community, that it's not a new thing. It's not a sort of an American idea or something, which I think is happening in other parts of Europe, even, that I think queer identity is politicized and seen as something that's imported, and like, you know, that the gay agenda is something that is like run by like the US or something, and that it's trying to like topple governments.
Oh, it's trying to take away people's masculinity with mozzarella sticks. Isn't that what someone said about Little Nas? Anyway.
That's so good.
Anyway.
But yeah, so I think it's important actually to say, no, this has been around all the time in every country, and it's actually part of your national story, our national story, in every place, even if it hasn't been well documented. And to sort of fight against that idea that we're some kind of like international mafia that's trying to take over the place, which we're obviously not.
Well, I would like to take over the place, but that's nothing to do with my identity as a queer woman. So I like what we were talking about there is the difference between 25 years ago. I finally did the maths from when we were watching it in 2018, 25 years to us. And then, but even with us, like we've given talks to people who are in college now, and we're like, oh my God, the difference in 10 years. Like, it's crazy, like how much things have changed. So like basically I started college in 2009. That was the same for you, was it?
Yeah.
And like, I just did not even remotely think that I could ever even tell anyone that I was queer. I was just like, no, I'll just keep that to the grave. That's fine. And then like, it didn't help that like, well, probably it didn't, maybe it didn't matter, but I was involved in the chomhbhádóir, and I didn't feel like there wasn't like a crossover very much between the QSOC, which is the LGBT society, and the chomhbhádóir. Which I do think there is now, or I think it's just more acceptable or normal for people to be like, oh, well, this is my identity, so whatever, in whatever group they're involved in. But for us, well, for me anyway, things really started changing in terms of like everybody else accepting queer people after the marriage referendum in 2015. And so for that, there was a group of Gaeilgeoirí called Tá Comhbhádóir, and that came together. And I was involved in that, which is really funny because I was just like not out like to everyone, like I was to my friends. But just for me, I think being in that group and like speaking on the Irish media, say in Radio nGael and places like that, about the referendum through Irish, and meeting and realizing that other Irish speakers were not against the idea, and like actually they wanted equality too. For me, that just like changed my entire perception of myself and Ireland and Gaeilgeoirí and Sail the Gaeilge and everything. So, and then like, I mean, even politicians were coming out saying like Tá Aerach, like Pat Carey did, and tograí aige, Leo Varadkar came out, obviously. Like, it just made it seem so like suddenly possible that I could be a queer Gaeilgeoir. So I don't know what it was like for you.
It was the same. And I remember I was actually in the US at the time of the referendum because I was on Fulbright at the time. And I remember, because I wasn't here, I wasn't in Ireland, I had a kind of warped sense of what was going on, and I was sure it wouldn't pass. I just thought, yeah, people in Dublin, of course, they're behind it, but like, I'm not sure, like, because I grew up in the Midlands, and I was like, I'm not sure about, those places. And I was so wrong. Like, and I think that's really interesting as well, because you often don't know what people think. And actually and I know that before I came out, it wasn't that I was seeing horrific acts of homophobia around the place. There was maybe a bit of slagging or whatever, but like, there wasn't any. Most of the fear was coming from within myself. And I think it was so nice to then see that actually all these people that you've grown up with your whole life, all across the country, like they all think it's fine, like, and maybe they don't care, or they think it's great or whatever, like, and that it was really so wonderful. Like, just crying that whole day, like when the votes came in. And I think within the Irish speaking community, then I do remember when I was in college in first year, I remember in a lecture that Dr. Caoimhín Bránach gave about Diarmuid agus Gráine and that story. And I remember there's a love triangle in that story, and he was explaining that to us. And in passing, he just said it's a bit like the story on EastEnders at the minute and then he named the characters. I can't remember their names now, but it was a love triangle between two men and a woman, but it was the two men who were sort of in a relationship. And it was the first time I'd ever heard really somebody just talk openly in a class in the education system about romance between two people of the same sex. And it was amazing. And I just thought, okay, this has happened, obviously I felt like college would be different to school anyway, but then I thought this happened in my Irish class, and like the Irish class that's about the medieval texts, and it really did just kind of open a door for me and say, this is okay. And it's not something to be remarked on. It's kind of, it did take me a while still to come out and be comfortable and everything with everybody I knew, but those things are actually so important, you know. And for him it was just probably a throwaway remark, but I've never forgotten it, you know. It's like 10 years later and I'm still remembering it, like, so so those things are important, just to create space for people, or to create a little opening for somebody to realize actually you are part of this group too, you know, and it's not you're not outside it.
That's funny, because now you're just reminding me that Damien McManus, when I had him, we were doing the Don Dearach, I think, and he told that story, which you know more about than me at this stage because you researched it, about the woman who slept with the woman and got pregnant. And then she's like, how did this happen? And it had happened that like the other woman had slept with a man like quite soon before or something. And that's in this like ancient text. But I do remember him telling us that story, and like his interest was whether it could happen. It wasn't whether it was interesting that these two women slept together. He was like, well, I met a gynecologist once, and I actually and I do remember like thinking, oh, there's more to this than I realized, you know. Or
I love when he talks about that as well, because he calls that story, he's given it his own it's a poem really, and I think it's from maybe the 17th century. But I remember he calls it The Lesbian and the Flying Priest. In, you know, it's not called that in his academic article, but in his classes he calls it that.
Why is it the Flying Priest?
And there is a priest in it that when the woman asked the king for his judgment, how she's ended up pregnant, he kind of like communes with, I think it's with God, and in so doing, these kind of rays from his head knock this priest out of the sky, who'd been brought up by flying demons because he'd become too bloated by pride. So he's called it The Lesbian and the Flying Priest. It's a wild story in a poem, like, and it's difficult to read because, you know, if you're not familiar with that period of Irish, but it is really worth a read. Like, it's good fun.
So that was the referendum. Were you in Philadelphia for that then?
I was.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
right.
I was. Yeah. So to my shame, I didn't even vote because
there's no
I would have.
Could you have
There's
voted?
no postal vote, but I would have flown home for it, except that my partner was due to come to me at that time. So we were both in Philadelphia when it happened, because they kept moving the date.
Oh, right.
Or they moved the date a few times, and he was sure that it wouldn't happen in May, but then it happened in May, and he was with me at the time. So we were in Boston actually when it happened, because we were going on a trip together.
Oh, that's nice that you were together.
It was nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So after that, 2015, it was kind of like, you know, the dust settled, and it was like, are we going to keep doing things? Like, are we going to get back into our little queer Gaeilgeoir boxes and be like, I'm just a Gaeilgeoir who happens to be queer, but I never talk about that, or what was going to happen? But I think you and I would like meet up on Pride then, like as friends. So I think in 2016 we did that. But I remember being surprised. It was like you, me, and like two other people, and we met other people. And at the end of the day, we were like, one of the years, maybe it was 2016, I said, whoa, like we just met entirely Irish speakers all day. And there are people who would not realize that exists, you know, but it was very unorganized. And then in 2017, it was Cian and Dean, who originally set up Gaeilgeoirí together, and they set up an event in the Comhrá for some poetry and like singing, and like it was a small little gathering, but it was like the start of something. Because then the following year we came back in 2018 with like Bród. Is that when we had Brian Lacey come and talk to us? The author.
Yes, yeah, and John Walsh. Yeah.
And John Walsh. Yeah, so Brian Lacey wrote the book Terrible Queer Creatures, which is like a history of queer people in Ireland, and definitely puts like stop to the myth that it's a new thing, because it goes pretty far back. And John Walsh, who of course talks about Irish speakers, Nuachain. We had talk, and then downstairs we had like bingo, and like it was just, and there was like a mix of generations, and it was really like invigorating. So ever since then, like it's just been growing and growing.
And something, just when you mentioned that Pride in 2018, something that Brian McMurrish mentioned to me when he was at that event, he said he was looking around and he said, this is amazing, like you've got LGB and T here in this room at this one event. And he said like that doesn't happen often at Pride events, even, because generally gay men know each other, or lesbians know each other, or bi people are kind of maybe by themselves or mixed in with the other groups.
Bi people are invisible.
Yeah. like they're mixed in with the other groups. They don't have their own event or whatever. And then trans is its own thing as well. And that's not the case because we're a smaller group, I think, as well in the Irish language community. It brings us, we have that in common as well as the fact that we're queer. So actually it brings us all together. And it was really valuable to hear all those different perspectives at the 2018 Pride, because we really did have a rainbow of identities and of sexual persuasions or whatever way we're supposed to say that.
Predilections.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was 2018, and I really felt like, oh my god, there's such Marraige to like bhí an iirsin éagsúlacht ann, agus bhí ba léir nach raibh sé seo le críochnú, go raibh sé díreach ina hús. And that was 2018. Then we had Pride 2019, back when we all had lives. And at the start of 2020, so it really wasn't that much time, that's when we set up AerachAiteachGaelach. So AerachAiteachGaelach it's funny because if I just look back, and I think it's because I had it on a poster from Pride 2018 where it said AerachAiteachGaelach, don't give up. And obviously, but then we used that name to set up this queer arts collective, because not only did we notice that there's actually so many Irish speakers who are queer, but then there's like so many, and there are also, it's like there's so many Irish speakers that are queer, and there's so many Irish speakers that are artists. And then there's like so many Irish queer artists, like Irish speaking queer artists. And
it's amazing. And I think there must be a reason for that as well, though. Like there must be something about being in those two groups that encourages those kind of things. Like I think lots of people who learn Irish are also like, they're interested in poetry. I think it's because we study the language. For lots of us, who wouldn't be native speakers, we study the language to such a depth. You get so familiar with words and using words and learning new words that I think it sort of leads you towards maybe thinking about language in a kind of creative way. And then I think if you're part of a minority, you have things to express as well. And I think that comes out, quite strongly, that lots of the art isn't about queer things, but lots of it is as well. So I think it's a perfect marriage of those two things that produces all those queer Irish speaking artists.
And I think as well, like once, if you're speaking Irish, you're obviously going to join the community of people who speak Irish. And as you've said before, there's like a strong culture of like an oral tradition. Like it's very normalized to write poems, recite poems, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and like thanks to Rec, your poetry event, like that's what it's close to everybody because it's in a space that's a space that you might go for a drink anyway. So like in the Generator, in the Club Chomhbhádóir Gaeilge, and you're just sitting there and there's poetry everywhere, and it's very, like you say, it's a very normal thing. And people like at the end of a night in the club will just burst into song, and it's newly made up songs or like much older songs that are part of the tradition, and all of that's very organic and very natural. And it's very unusual though if you're not part of the Irish language community for that to happen.
I know, it's funny actually. I suppose it would be kind of, if you know loads of actors or you're in a really creative sector or something, it might be similar. But yeah, there is such an overlap between Irish speakers and artists, like outside of the queer thing. Like, and it's funny because if you go to see a play or like just if you go to a show, or you always run into someone, you're like, oh, are you producing this, or are you acting in that, or that's Hillary, like, and they're like, why do you know all these people? I'm like, they just speak Irish. And then they're like, and do you know everyone who speaks Irish? And I'm like, yes. I try to. There's too many of them though. So anyway, we were just like, we need to get all these people together so that we can make more art like with the queer Gaeilgeoirí. And we set up AerachAiteachGaelach. We applied for the Abbey 5x5, which is this great opportunity to be in our national theatre for a week as a group and to try and produce something. And we had the wonderful Hildegard Ryan as our director. We had Eva O'Connor give us a workshop, and then we just literally said, hi, are you queer and do you make art? Because if you are, please join our group. And all these fantastic people turned up that like, I didn't even know about them. Well, I knew about some of them, but it was great to meet them officially. And then ever since then, we've kind of been doing more as a collective, like meeting on Zoom. And then you've been so fab with like the newsletters and getting opportunities, like letting people know what opportunities are out there. And like, it's been mad. Like, how many people are now members of AerachAiteachGaelach?
60. Actually, I know because I looked the other day. It's exactly 60 at the minute.
60, yeah.
But it is growing all the time. Like, and there's actually 2 Gaelic speakers in it now as well. So we've actually like bridge the sea, say, and
Cool.
it's nice to have that because, and then at the Queercal Comhrá as well, we have Gaelic speakers who listen in Irish but then speak back in Gaelic, and it's in Scotland, so that's the Gaelic that's spoken in Scotland, and it's really nice to have that because, you know, it's the only contact I have to a Gaelic speaker through that. And it's really nice to have that connection. But yeah, it's grown out in all kinds of ways, which is really interesting.
Do you think it's made you make more art? Because you've really exploded in the last year.
It definitely has. There's no question about it. Yeah, because I've always written a small bit of poetry for myself, say, or, you know I was at Rec maybe in 2014, 15, and I always loved going to it. But yeah, it's really seeing other people produce and seeing their process and seeing the kinds of things they're doing has really allowed me to do the same. And I think especially because we're in lockdown at the minute, like I find I'm very, very busy, but I do have time that I wouldn't have if life were normal. And it's lovely to fill that time, not just by, you know, sitting down looking at the wall, or like, obviously I do watch Netflix as well, but it's lovely every so often to just sit down and work on something creative. And it's a completely different feeling. It gives me so much energy that maybe Netflix wouldn't, you know, so I've been really enjoying that.
That's so good. And like you've had things published, you've had, you know, some of the, like one of the videos you made, Trouble Sposs, what the rap you wrote, like was on the front page of the newspaper, Shafton, wasn't it? And like,
yeah.
It's, and then other people in the group have had, like, they've had plays commissioned, they've had, like, I'm trying to think of other things that have happened. They've won prizes as well. Like it's been really a great year for AerachAiteachGaelach for its first year.
It has, yeah. And I think we're sort of being noticed as well. You know, all of the stuff we do is voluntary, and it is a lot of work, you know, even though maybe the work isn't always seen, but there is a lot of work in it, applying for things, or, you know, arranging the newsletter, or like arranging the meetings and stuff. Like it is work. Not that we don't enjoy it, but I think it's starting to be noticed as well. So an event that's coming up now, Cluiche Snatch na Gaeilge, so a sort of snatch game in Irish, is being Aeracha funded or sponsored, thanks, yeah, by Boris na Gaeilge and Aerachas na Gaeilge, which is really nice for them to recognise that we are doing this positive work in terms of getting Irish speakers together and encouraging others, you know, because I think what happens is it encourages people who are in the queer community but maybe not fluent Irish speakers to think, oh, look, that's a possibility that I didn't think existed, and then to start maybe, you know, putting their toe into the Queercal and then coming back to the Queercal more often and just getting, you know, comfortable again speaking Irish. So it's nice for that recognition to be there as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like there's so many gateways into Irish, you know, like somebody might join the Queercal Comhrá and be like, actually, now that I'm speaking more Irish, I want to get really good at it, because there can be, like, it's came a latogan kind of dolo chuna úsáid an Gaeilge go dtí a leabhair Gaeilge go léithú. So I think it really helps if you're involved in it. That's what you need, is to be involved in a social group where, like, you are forced every single day to write sentences that involve the Mocanílic and the Tishlegidadak and everything. And you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about how to be funny in a WhatsApp to your friends, you know. So, like, yeah, it's so good to have the Queercal and AerachAiteachGaelach to bring in people who might have felt like, oh, I don't know where I fit in this Irish language world. And I think that was kind of a similar thing that I found with Rec, is that, like, not only did it give it a stage to people who were writing in Irish, you know, it actually invited people who were interested in trying to write in Irish to come along. And then, like, a few years later, they're doing more and more with the language, which is great to see.
Yeah, and I think those things have a dual function as well, because while you're building the community of artists, you're also building the audience. And the audience is so important. Like, what is an artist that doesn't have an audience? Really, it's like a tree falling in the wood, like, you know. But I think that's something that's really important. And the way the Queercal and the AerachAiteachGaelach work together is actually very healthy, because, you know, AerachAiteachGaelach is there to support the artists, but the Queercal wants to see things where queer characters are represented or where queer issues are sort of discussed in art. And they're keen for the artists to produce, and then the artists want people to see their stuff, so it actually works very nicely together. What attracts people as well is the positivity around it. I think for people outside the Irish language community who don't really know much about us, I think sometimes they're looking and they see that we're campaigning for this and we're complaining about this, you know? And obviously it's important that we do those things too, but those things aren't going to attract people to join us, you know?
Oh, you mean the Irish language community at large? Yeah, like Chomhbhádóir Gaeilge complains that this, which is really important, but also,
yeah, it's not the thing that's going to hook you and you like bring you in. And I think something that AerachAiteachGaelach does is very well is that we don't. It's almost exclusively in Irish. Do you know? I mean, the work that we do is exclusive. The conversations exclusively in Irish. The work is either bilingual or Irish, but it's not. It's for an Irish-speaking or bilingual population. It's not for the people who speak a few words, which is nice because it encourages people to have a few words to say, oh, I want to know what she's saying. You know, I want to understand that poem. I want to understand that song, and to encourage them to actually learn more of the language, which I think is really important because sometimes we just sort of stop after a couple of focal and don't go any further because lots of stuff is bilingual. But I think it's important to have that monolingual stuff, you know, to make, you know, to encourage people to dive in, kind of.
So we've talked about the Queercal, we've talked about AerachAiteachGaelach, we've talked about Bród kind of growing through every year. And I've kept you way longer than I intended to, but I would like to run through some terms for like how to talk about being LGBT in Irish. So, I mean, the first one is gay, which is Aerach, which is like English. Aerach used to mean happy and gay, like gay in that kind of way.
And does still, like, I think people still do use it, you know, occasionally like that. It's much more like gay is gone. Its old meaning is completely gone in English. But I think Aerach still has two meanings in Irish, and it's in songs and things as well.
Yeah.
Like, an Cailín's as Aerach, it's not a gay girl. Like, it's just a sort of a, you know, it leaves room for sort of play there as well. But I think ultimately it did mean just a kind of a happy-go-lucky kind of light-spirited person.
Well, yeah, because it happened more recently in Irish, didn't it? Like there's still people alive who would be like, when I grew up, Aerach didn't mean that, and it's just like, well, it does now. But like, yeah, I understand it does have the two meanings.
Yeah, and it's actually because of that gentleman you mentioned, Roy Galvin, who was on that program with MTS, who set up the GAA, you know, the Gaeilgeoirí Aeracha Aontaithe. It was him, I believe, who coined that word. So he translated the word gay in Irish in a similar way. And actually it's so interesting that one person did that, and then the community gets behind the word and then makes it their own. And it's so normal for us to use that word now, and it doesn't feel strange at all.
No.
Whereas it probably felt strange in 1993, 4, whenever you know, it was brought up.
Woohoo! Yay! Good man, got right. Yeah, so sin spatial mar Aerach, as you said, must have sounded strange at the start, but it's important to have a word that's kind of neutral to talk about things, because I know they would have had like maybe lupa or calm or something beforehand, but they have all this negative association.
Yeah, and then you've got like homogyneiseach, which everybody would have found in the dictionary, like homosexual, but like it's I mean, it's more of a medical term almost than, I mean, it's not medical, but it comes from that sphere, and it's much nicer to have a, like you say, a neutral word that doesn't that isn't, you know, and it's nice that it is taken from, it's not a sort of translation in the way that homogyneiseach is. It feels like a much more native word, which is nice because it feels like it fits into your sentences better, you know.
Yeah, so Aerach was always there when we grew up. I think like that was just a word that you knew was an Irish word, like, and then lesbian is lesbiach. Like,
which you hate. I know you hate that translation. I think
I don't like it because it almost seems like you have to like put it like machel or the caint or raw. Like it's like I can't say lesbian properly. I have to say lesbiach. I don't know. But I think a lot of people don't like the word lesbian in English even, and I think it's just kind of layered with misogyny from some people. Like I think it's kind of like more so than gay. Oh, I don't know actually, because gay is used as an insult as well. But I do know a lot of people who don't really like lesbian, and like it's funny because there's kind of a uptake online of people using the word sapphic now and things like that.
Okay. Which is interesting. And actually there's a new book of poetry came out there recently called Sappho, so where the word sapphic comes from, the poet in Greece who lived on the island of Lesbos, who seems like she's somebody you'd want to have at your dinner table, you know, if you could go meet people from the past. Yeah. But Catriona Ní Chléirchín translated it to Irish recently, and it's lovely to have that, you know, to have those references to romance between women in an Irish text now as well, even though it's from the original Greek or from English. I'm not sure which you translated it from.
Speaking of text in Irish, before I forget, Green Carnations, Glas na Gaeilge, you should do a little plug for it.
Yeah, this is a book that came out at the end of last year, at the end of 2020, and we got copies at the end of 2020, but it's sort of being promoted now in 2021. It's a queer collection of poetry in English and in Irish. So there are poems there from Ricciardo Huddle, from Sam O'Farry, and from myself. And it's a lovely book. It's sort of young poets writing about their experience, and lots of the poems have queer themes. So yeah, really, really worth the look. So Green Carnations.
Yeah. It's not actually really a bilingual book as such. It's majority in English, is it? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and there are some poems then which are there in translation as well. So there is the Irish and the English for those poems as well. That's
great. I've ordered my copy. It's on the way. I got an email, so I'm excited. So back to the words. So bisexual is dé gnéasach.
Yeah, that one's quite simple. Dé is bi, then and actually you see the same word, that same little piece in non-binary, which we might come to, but you can see the same little particle in there. Gnéis is the word for sex, and then makes something into an adjective. So dé gnéasach is literally bisexual.
Yes. Dé gnéasach. And I don't particularly like the word bisexual. I don't mind it, but I just hate the way you have to say sexual. Like you can't just be like, oh, I'm gay, or like you have to be like, I'm bisexual. Yeah. A very sexual person, actually. It's just like, oh, but I don't mind it as much in Irish. Oh.
Yeah, I think, and then I think in English people say I'm bi, and I don't know if that's happening in Irish yet. Tommy day, I don't think that's happened, but it could easily.
So then we'll go to non-binary, which, since you did make that good link.
So that's nav yeanarha, and so yeanarha is binary, which you would use in terms of like sort of computer code and everything as well, and then nav is negates that.
Yeah.
Nav yeanarha.
So then transgender is tras inscnach.
Yeah. And people also use just tras, like in English trans, without the whatever is at the end. I think there was tras gnéasach, that you do find that word as well, like transsexual, but that is not in current use as much. I don't think you do see like people saying trans with the star after it to include anything that could be put after that, and you can see that in Irish as well, tras with a star. And the day we're recording, as it happens, is the International Day for Trans Visibility, so it's nice to note that.
Hello, a chóirde tras. So then we have AerachAiteach. Woo, best term. So yeah, Ciara Gaeilge are queer, and it's interesting we were talking about Aerach, because AerachAiteach is one of those ones where it was made like a word that was formed. Well, actually no, it's a bit different, because AerachAiteach wasn't a thing already, was it? At was.
No.
And then
Yeah. So at is strange. It also I heard one of the last speakers from Clare. This is a wonderful video of them speaking to Lima Muirhile, and the man keeps saying it's atlome or it's atlomiad, but what he means you might think that means I find those people strange, but it's I love those people, or I think I like those people. So it actually has that meaning too, which isn't in question here. It is from sort of the word weird, and that they've added the suffix to it to make it into an adjective. But it's just nice that that's also a use of it. Is atlome means it's strange or it's peculiar to me, but it also means I really like that, so that's
spatial. So it's nice. Batlo ban.
yeah so there's several meanings within that, which makes it just a good title.
Agus cad they're orintha like bhí fós aisteach ach ní chilíonn sé aisteach, like it means like large or noticeable or suntasach, doesn't it?
Okay, yeah. With Aiteach, we're not actually sure where it came. We can't find the original reference to it. I'm pretty sure it's from Brian O'Cruthur. I think he coined the term, a scholar in Notre Dame University, but I'm not sure. I can't find actually the original. I haven't dug enough to find where the original. I think it came from academia, really.
Oh,
But
I
I'm
didn't
not
know
sure.
that.
So we have to find that. Yeah.
Okay, we
So
have to ask Brian.
Yes, we will. If you're watching, Brian, please let us know.
Chur USI an Foclóir Aiteach amach cúpla bliain ó hinanis agus bhí like biscéal mór ag an am.
Yeah, but yeah, I think in the we have the new dictionary now, the English-Irish dictionary, which is great, that first na Gaeilge brought out on Goom just last year. And that is much more up to date than the dictionaries we had before. So it has far more of these terms that were missing before. But before that, we were relying on dictionaries from the 70s and the 50s, which didn't have any of these terms in them. So it was really important that the USI did actually collect these terms and have that queer dictionary. There are some small issues with the language in it, but and so it would be really good if they brought out a second edition where they just sort of looked through some of those things. But it was really important to start the conversation about the need for those terms and the importance that actually there are people who live their lives every day and who need these terms.
Yeah.
So they should be accessible for people who are trying to describe their own, lives and their own situations. We still have difficulties in the queercal sometimes when it comes to sort of like, sometimes the conversation goes in the direction of sex. And then it can be difficult actually, because sometimes we don't have the terms that are so common in English-speaking gay circles. We don't have
slang.
Slang. It's not even, things like, top and bottom and stuff, which are not, they're slang because the rest of the world doesn't use them, but they're not slang in that like, we use them all the time, in that way. So like when you look for the word top or the word bottom in the dictionary doesn't know what you're looking for. So they say bor, which just means the top of a page or the top of a building or whatever, and bun, which is the bottom of something. So we could just use those words, but it's like, that's, they're not sort of specifically made for what we're talking about. So it's interesting. And then people get kind of creative and fill the blanks. So like people said bhFÍSEAN, and bunadóir, but I don't know if those are more widely accepted outside of this small group, so those things are interesting. It would be interesting if the Coiste Tíormaíochta sat down and had a chat about tops and bottoms versatile and made up some terms for them.
Is dóirm go beh sin táhachtach nar tá siad ag gastra rudí bhfuin leis an ólaíocht agus rudí mar sin, like tá táhachtach sin freisin ach like tá géir gá leis na Tíormaí Aiteacha le darn rúpa do chuoine déine tá bio in san am láthair.
Agus braham gofuil rud eile sin freisin go méidir tuist nach bhfuil na Tíormaí an hána gofuil suirt deis an or gomach deis an chur a gcuine cuidas na rudí atá beidir dúltach atá sa méile. Like mar hampla, so like about top and bottom, like in other European languages they often say active and passive, but there's always in any conversation around tops and bottoms there's in sort of an underlying misogyny around bottoms, I find, which is interesting because it's about two men, but there is an interesting that does exist, and sort of anti-femme kind of bullying or violence even. Its root is in misogyny rather than anything else, I think. And so I think there is an opportunity maybe to sort of level the playing field in some of those terms if they have negative connotations in English, to actually change those terms entirely so that we start afresh in the other language, in Irish.
So an chuiste Tíormaíochta tá Eoin McEvoy ar fáil mar chomhlóir tangan más míadh. I didn't mention drag queen, which is Bonry and drag. Agus is fiú go mór é sin a bheith eolalas agat. And
drag performer as well, Taibhir drag, which covers queens and kings or anybody else. So that's another nice one to have. And actually it'd be worth people's while watching Draglan, the first drag show in Irish ever that came out just a few weeks ago for Seachtain na Gaeilge, that Kitty Ní Houlihan ran, and it's just fantastic crack altogether. It's just really worth a watch.
Yes, people should definitely watch the Draglan. So I'll leave the link to that below. I'll try and link just various people in AerachAiteachGaelach. But we did have last year, like we were only a few months in the world, but we did have a Bród event, just trying to pivot for the for COVID, and we had like everybody sent us in their own videos, which was fab. And then for Seachtain na Gaeilge this year, we had 4 different performers doing music, which was like Tá sé just bíonn sé ar siúla gom sa coolar ag go minic-inis. Like I just put it on in the background because it's just a fantastic show.
It is. It's beautiful music,
Yeah.
and wonderful videos as well. Like,
It's like-
really, really happy to when we got the videos in from the people. We didn't know what they would do, and it's just so creative and really, really lovely.
Yeah, and Tygo Griffin, I have to mention because his video starts like go down and click into the Seachtain na Gaeilge concert, right? And watch Tyge's like first video. He's like all made up and he has like this hood on and he's like in a car. It's amazing. I was just like, oh, amazing. Like he obviously got some production company or like, you know, didn't know how he did it, but like, you know, he's amazing. So then puts up a thing on Instagram that his dad filmed this entire video like in the dead of night in their like where they live. I was just like,
in Carlow, just in a housing estate. It's fantastic. It's fantastic.
I think it just to watch the video first and then like with that or watch it. You can't watch it first because you know the knowledge now, but watch it with that knowledge in your head and it's just like another level. And then Tyke up this selfie of him and his dad just like so happy. Like
it's really inspiring to see that though, and to see actually the difference that one person or like the 4 people in that video make, because like they're making this beautiful music in Irish, and like they just show that you can do it, and that it is really beautiful when people do it and when people you know put the effort into it. So it's so lovely to have those 8 songs from those 4 artists.
Yeah,
Tyg, Lauren and Ellie, just really good, really wonderful stuff that they've done.
We mentioned the Cluiche Snatch, but if you want to say anything about it again, we want to get people to enter. Everybody knows what the Snatch game is from RuPaul's Drag Race, but we are going to do one online this year. So that's going to be our kind of flagship event for Pride this year. So it's going to be done on Zoom. We're going to record it in May, and then we're going to put it out in June. Just to give us time to make sure that, like, I don't know, like the defamation laws are pretty scary. So we don't want anybody getting sued. So we're going to make sure we cut it in a way that's fun, but still not getting anyone sued.
And that also allows people to, you know, make mistakes and stuff that we can cut out. So it's actually for the performers as much as for the, you know, for the audience. So it's and like anybody, you don't have to be queer to enter. Like anybody's very welcome to come, so long as you've a bit of crack about you and you're able to speak Irish. Obviously, that's important. And you can dress as a person of any gender. That's irrelevant. Like so long as it's make it funny, like RuPaul says, and then it's fine.
Yeah, so if you think you can do a good impression or you've ever wanted to try your hand at the Snatch game, with the knowledge that it will be pre-recorded, so if you make a mistake, you can say, please, can I do that again? So don't be too worried. Please get in contact. The grand prize is €300, and it'll be just a great event. I'm sure you'll meet lots of lovely people as part of it as well. Tásúlagam gur bhain sibh sé ag baile talamh as a gcóra seo le Eoin Mac is fiú go mór é leanúint ar na bhean ho síalta agus on Queercal Comhrá a leanúint freisin. The Queercal Comhrá is just a great curation of all these different LGBTQ events happening in Irish, so definitely give that a follow. Sin é Eoin, thank you for talking to me this morning and for spending an entire hour at it as well.
I could talk to you for the whole day if you wanted, so
just one more thing that we want to mention.
We were listening to interviews that happened during the week on Radio na Gaeltachta, and also to Sean O'Duchan's new play, radio play, Nuair Squilt and Scahan. And I just thought it'd be important for us to come back together and just add this to the end of the talk, just to mention that what we sort of emphasize through AerachAiteachGaelach and the Queercal Comhrá are the positives. And we spend as little time as we can sort of dealing with haters and that kind of stuff, because we prefer to pour our energy into community and into the arts. But obviously, and I can't remember if we spoke about it or not in our talk, but there's obviously still problems that we do face as a community, both in the city and in rural areas. And I think it's just important that we mention that now in case we missed it earlier in the talk.
And I don't know about you, Eoin, but I do get my fair share of homophobic vitriol directed at me because I am vocally queer online.
I've escaped it somehow. Maybe this will be the end of me now because I've done this interview and they'll come after me too, but I've seen it through the stuff that we've done with AerachAiteachGaelach. There's been, and it's surprising because it comes out of nowhere, it feels like. And I know that lots of it maybe that seems like it comes from the Irish language community. When you actually look closer at it, you realize actually that the people actually probably aren't Irish speakers, but they're using Google Translate to come at you from that angle, which is especially annoying because you don't know obviously who they are and that they're using the language as a kind of a weapon against you. So, but I know it does exist, and I know even in those interviews, you know, the point was that it was a minority, but it, you know, when you live in a city, there's a critical mass of people. So a few people who are around, or a, you know, a minority of the population doesn't really affect you. But if you're in a small community, if there's just one or two people even, they can make it impossible for you to live there as well. So, you know, that does exist. But I mean, at the same time, you know, I've started watching Russ and Arun again, and like when it came out in 1996, there's a gay couple in the first few minutes of the first program in the first series. You know, so it's, you know, there's both, you know, sides in the Gaeltacht, you know, as there are in probably every rural community, but just to recognize that there is that element still there that we do need to work with, or, you know, call out sometimes if it's too much, to make it a better place for everybody to live.
And a lot of these people with the accounts online as well, they very well might be in the city. So this is not a rural urban divide. It just so happens that the story that made us come back on and record this little bit happened to be about a rural community. But it's good that you brought that up, Eoin, about people trying to weaponize Irish, because we hadn't covered that. And there is this kind of, I don't know how you'd even describe them, alt-right, kind of, I don't know
who they are,
racist. Like, I don't know, like just generally not nice group of people who are trying to basically, right, Eoin said, weaponize the Irish language, and they're saying like, we're so Irish, we speak Irish, and like actually they don't, which any Irish speaker can tell from looking at the way they write. It's either Google translated or clearly kind of shoddily translated from English, and you can tell that just from the syntax and the translation itself. But it's really annoying because then as an Irish speaker, you know, the people who don't have your level of Irish can't see that. And then they're getting this incorrect view that there are these hordes of Irish speaking fascists out there, when actually I think that's not the case at all. And a lot of Irish people would be very understanding of minorities, given that Irish speaking people will be very understanding of minority groups. Not all. That's
exactly it. Yeah, not all. No, and there's you know, like in every community, there's good eggs and bad eggs, but like I do personally feel very safe in the Irish language community, you know, when I'm in the Gaeltacht, when I'm in the city, in general. And that I think it's important to say that, because I think sometimes, like you say, people from the outside have a different idea about what it represents, that it represents something more traditional maybe than it does. You know, it represents both the tradition and the contemporary and the future. Like it is all of those things, you know.
Yeah. As Blind Boy says, 10% of any group are Gaels. So it's like, if you do me a Gael Gaeilgeoirí, that's not the rest of the 90%.
No.
Gur magat as tograí Eoin agus slán.
Slán.